Canada and the F-35. We just can't seem to get it together on this file, can we? Hi, I'm Brian Lilley, political columnist for the Toronto Sun. We are in the middle of a debate in this country about which fighter jet to buy. We shouldn't be in this debate. We joined the F-35 program in the 1990s under a prime minister named Jean Chretien. There's plenty of people who could be fighter pilots today who were not alive when Jean Chretien was the prime minister of this country, and yet we're still debating. We joined the Joint Strike Fighter program in the 90s. By the early 2000s, we were supposed to be buying the F-35. The Harper government, under pressure from the opposition, called for a review. Then they eventually said we'd buy it. Then there was the election in 2015. Justin Trudeau said we'd never buy the F-35, reviewed all the other options, said, okay, the F-35 is the only plane to buy. Now enter Mark Carney, the trade war with the United States. Suddenly, we're reviewing it again. And now we've got the King and Queen of Sweden doing a house call to Canada to trying to get us to buy a fighter jet that was first in service before I finished high school in 1988. Joining me now to talk about this is Billie Flynn. He is a retired Air Force veteran. He is a fighter jet pilot in his career. He doesn't fly anymore, but he's one of the few Canadians in the world who have flown an F-35, and fifth-generation stealth fighter jet. Billie, thanks for joining me today. You were one of the first to fly the CF-18 that's still rattling around in the skies. How long ago was that?
Brian, thanks for having me today. Oh, you know, I first flew it 42 years ago. I was the first baby pilot picked to fly the CF-18. And, you know, who would have imagined that Canadians would still be flying the same jet more than 4 decades later, slated to go to almost 50 years of service? It's inconceivable that we would be defending Canada's north, our sovereignty, with an airplane that old.
So, I mean, you joined the Air Force in the early 80s. Can you imagine, would you have joined if in the early 1980s, the Air Force said to you, yeah, we'd love for you to be a pilot for us. Here's this plane that we put into service at the beginning of the Second World War. And that's essentially what we're asking them to do. The time frames are the same.
Well, things are really going to change now with a fifth-generation fighter coming. And the recruitment problem in the RCAF will go away with the excitement of an F-35 coming and the promise of a next-generation capability that eclipses anything that those young men and women would have imagined in service from the CF-18 days. It's a revolutionary wave of capability coming.
And I understand that, but Billie, I've talked to military brass, retired military brass, who say when Justin Trudeau canceled the F-13 project in 2015 and all of the ups and downs, after that 2015 cancellation, we had a whole bunch of pilots leave. We have not been able to recruit properly, and the recruitment problem is still there because we are dithering. I mean, this really does hurt the Canadian Armed Forces long-term, not being able to settle on the plane that we should have ordered back in, 10, 15 years ago, that we should have been flying already. So talk to me about that. You say this will, if we finally do it, and that's up in the air, it will boost recruitment, but we've had a recruitment problem since the cancellation. Why is that? Explain that to the viewers who don't get it. Well, you're flying a fighter jet anyways. What's the difference? Explain it to us.
Well, look, if you want the most talented, the most capable men and women to come join the RCF to be fighter pilots, you better offer them the most capable systems out there. Airplanes that are survivable and, oh, by the way, lethal when, not if, they are sent into harm's way. And an old airplane like a CF-18 is not survivable in modern day combat. And so why would men and women sign up to join an airplane where they know that if they're sent into harm's way, their very lives are put at risk? That has been a huge issue motivating men and women to join the armed forces, because this system, the capabilities are so old now, and they're irrelevant.
What is it about the F-35 that makes it different? You and I have talked about this before. I've looked into the systems on my own. I think it is a superior fighter jet, and yet, we've looked at the Super Hornet. We're looking at the Gripen again. We'll look at anything. I mean, I'm shocked that the government isn't saying let's buy a Chinese fighter jet. But why should we be buying the F-35? for anyone that's watching and saying, oh, yeah, but Billie Flynn, he works for Lockheed Martin. No, you haven't worked with them or for them in years. You're giving an independent analysis. Why does the F-35 beat the competition?
Let's break this down in two terms, Brian. Capability and capacity. So let's talk capability. Every one of our allies has based their future on the F-35 and fifth generation capabilities. You mentioned China. The Chinese today are flying and testing sixth generation fighters and bombers. The absolute baseline moving forward is a fifth generation capability. And I'll give you a real world contrast. It has nothing to do with my history. In May of this year, in the latest Pakistani-Indian skirmish, the Pakistani Air Force shot down a 4.5 generation Indian fighter. That's the same technology as in Gripen. They shot it down. They saw it more than 130 kilometers away, fired a Chinese missile at it, and shot it down. Now, contrast that with what the Israeli Air Force did in June of this year, where Israeli F-35s flew hundreds and hundreds of miles, essentially across Iran, and demolished the defenses of Tehran, the most heavily defended space in the world, did all of that undetected. So on one hand, you have a 4.5 generation fighter like the Gripen shot down in modern combat today versus fifth generation F-35s that went against the most heavily defended place on earth and did it undetected. That's what we're talking about when we contrast a Gripen technology, first flew in 1988, like you said, 37 years ago, versus the next wave of capability that our allies all possess, an F-35, a fifth generation capability. And don't forget, because you used the example of me flying 42 years ago, because I was clearly a 5-year-old back then, we're going to keep our fighter jets, like everything we buy, for 4 decades. So if you start out today with an airplane that first flew 37 years ago, how do you imagine it would be survivable moving forward? That's capability. Capacity. We have the largest coastline in the world, surrounded by 3 oceans and clearly a very unfriendly neighbor to the south. But we have to protect our country and that continent, and that will take every one of those 88 F-35s. And the biggest gap for the defenses of North America, Canada, is along the polar cap. And when and if Russia and China ever decide to attack Canada and North America, they're coming over the north, and it will be up to Canada to protect our airspace. We'll need every one of those F-35s and the amazing territory that those airplanes see with their sensors and how they're all linked together. We will need the entire fighter force to protect Canada. That's capability and capacity. And we need both of those. A fifth generation F-35 provides that, and a 4.5 generation old technology airplane cannot.
I still hear, and it amazes me that I still hear this, but this is how embedded and how deep the anti-F-35 propaganda is if I raise the F-35, somebody would say, but it can't fly in the Arctic. The Americans have proven that's not true for more than a decade now, haven't they?
There are 58 of them based at Eielson Air Force Base in Fairbanks, Alaska, which is colder than any place that we fly out of in Canada. I led the cold weather testing of the F-35 now more than 10 years ago, and it manages to operate in 40 below weather, like in Cold Lake, Alberta, like in Bagotville, like we will need in Inuvik and Iqaluit. And as you said, every winter for years now, they have operated without fail from Fairbanks, Alaska, in the far north of America.
What is it that you think drives the anti-F-35 agenda? Because this has been like an ongoing campaign for years. As I said, first time this became a big issue politically was the 2008 federal election. Stephen Harper under pressure, trying to win a second minority, and it seemed like the entire media was against him. The Liberals and the New Democrats were against him. The Bloc was against him. And you kept having bureaucrats coming out of the woodwork saying, this is horrible. And yet, almost to a man and woman, anyone that's worn the uniform says, this is the way we've got to go, the F-35. And yet the entire agenda the other way is, no, we should never be flying this plane. What drives that?
Well, it goes back to history. So let's talk about history and then where we are today. Look, it was to be a winner-take-all franchise program, the biggest defense program in history. And the people in the day, now 20 years ago, overpromised and underdelivered. And as a test pilot who was part of the development of that airplane, I can tell you it was technologically remarkably difficult to mature every bit of the capabilities that we promised. But we're over that hump. 14 of our closest allies fly the F-35 now. Nations like Denmark and Belgium and Germany have actually added more aircraft to their orders because they believe in the capability that comes with it. If you look today, because we're still debating it, let's face it, it is the gift that keeps on giving. Look, Saab has executed a masterclass in marketing and communications. Saab has clearly understood the political opportunity. They also understand that in the press in Canada, all across, not you in particular, there is a very thin understanding of anything that relates to defense. And the Canadian public is more than upset, incredibly emotional to anything, anti-Trump and anti-American. And you put those all together, and Saab has realized they have a unique opportunity, and they are doing their very best to capitalize it, even though every military expert has tried to explain to the Canadian public, press, and politicians why an old generation aircraft is not survivable in modern warfare and does not work in Canada. Look, it's not cheaper. A Gripen costs 90 million euros, Saab's price. That's more than the F-35 cost. And people claim it's super cheap to operate. I hear it all the time in Canada that it costs $5,000 an hour to operate a Saab Gripen, when in fact, in gas alone, it's more than $6,000. And by Saab's own number, it's $22,000 an hour US to operate, which is more than $30,000 an hour to fly, 6 times more than the number that Canadian politicians, media, and the public passes out. So, you know what? Everybody loves to hate the F-35. The experts love it and keep ordering more. But in Canada, it has just become a debate that won't go away. And here we are now today talking about a Swedish royal visit and a massive delegation of Swedish companies trying to get business in Canada.
Well, you look at the countries that fly the F-35 versus fly the Gripen. Our closest military allies fly the F-35. The British, the French, the Germans, all of these countries, as you mentioned, Denmark, Belgium. Who's flying the Gripen? It's Sweden. It is the Czech Republic and Hungary. Those are probably the 2 closest. Hungary's part of NATO. But mostly it's Brazil and South Africa. These are not the militaries that we want to be emulating and working with. We need to be working with the Americans. So, I mean, interoperability, isn't that part of the issue? And could the Americans...
Look, let's talk about that. The Czech Republic is retiring its Gripens, had an open competition that F-35 won. South Africa has Gripens. None of those fly. Colombia just signed an agreement to buy Gripen if the United States government lets those jets go there. Brazil, Peru, the Philippines, Thailand are all part of the sales campaigns, but we don't fly with them. When we talk about First World Air Forces, Five Eyes nation, we're talking about the most capable nations in the world, and those are our allies. Yes, a Saab Gripen flown by Swedes is interoperable with other NATO nations. It can fly in formations, even though it's an airplane that has no stealth and can easily be seen and shot down. But it cannot communicate the same way the F-35s communicate together. An F-35 has a data link, let's call it a network, that shares information from one cockpit to the next, all the information, so that everybody has the complete picture of the airspace, the digital battle space. That system, called the Multi-Function Advanced Data Link, MADL, is a U.S. super secret system that shares between F-35s. If you're a Swedish-built fighter, You're not on that network, nor will you ever be allowed on that network. Only the countries that fly a fifth generation F-35 are allowed to share the information. So they're the ones that are truly interchangeable and interoperable. That matters in NORAD for Canada, because whether Canadians like it or not, more than half of Canadian airspace today is guarded by American fighters. And in the future, we want to be completely seamlessly integrated with them. And it matters in NATO when we go fight wars together, like when I fought over Kosovo and Serbia as the commander during Operation Allied Force back in 1999. Interoperable, yes, we can all fly together. Interchangeable is the essence of what we need, especially when we talk about adversaries like China and Russia and real world peer level threats like in the Ukraine and the potential fight against China in the near future.
But they've got this offer on the table of, well, build the Saab in Canada and you'll get 10,000 jobs from building this. I'm not buying it, Billy. And right now we've got about 3,000 jobs in Canada supported by the F-35 project. And that is in supplying parts, not just to the planes that we build, but every single F-35 that is built to go around the world. And they've got a 2,000 plane backlog. We're never going to build 2,000 Gripens. We got a 2,000 plane backlog for the F-35. The Saudis are in Washington trying to convince Trump to sell them about 50. You've got countries lined up, and Canadian parts will be in all of those, from the tailwind, landing gears, things like that. There's a potential for a maintenance contract at Mirabel, north of Montreal, if we're part of the project. But if we're not part of the project, that maintenance contract goes away. And guess what? Well, we might keep the contract for the parts for a little while, but over the long term, the Americans will say, you're not part of the project if we can find a different supplier for the parts that we buy from Winnipeg or from Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, or from British Columbia. We will find different parts. Am I wrong on that?
No, remember when someone comes to you with some amazing deal and you learned early in life, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is? Look, the promise of 10,000 jobs to build a small number of fighters. In Brazil, the production line for the Gripen involves 260 people. So I'm not sure where 10,000 jobs would come from in the F-35 over its lifetime. And you're right, there are Canadian parts and have always had Canadian parts in the manufacturing of F-35s of what will be more than 3,000 airplanes over its lifetime. Canadian content from Delta, BC, all the way to Nova Scotia, like you said. And the critical parts of that airplane built in Canada. It's a franchise program. How you're ever going to make up the equivalent amount of that money and jobs, investment in Canadian high tech, when you're going to assemble, not manufacture. It's like IKEA. Sorry to use the Swedish analogy, but it's like IKEA. Give me an Allen wrench and a screwdriver, and you're going to put pieces together on an assembly line in Montreal or Toronto. That could never equal the benefits economically and high tech jobs that come from F-35. The numbers just don't fit. 88 Gripens or some part of that does not equal more than 3,000. And the scale that comes with a franchise program like F-35 makes it an overwhelming case to continue in the program.
It amazes me that you and I are talking about this about 15 years after we first started talking about.
Years. You and I have been talking about this. Honestly, we used to meet in Ottawa when I was still an F-35 test pilot. It's been 15 years we've been talking about this. It's a very difficult sale because it's a very complex airplane. And for the first time in history, the public has actually followed the development and lifetime of a history. Nobody remembers that the F-18 was thought to be a lemon back when we first bought it, and the many, many problems we had in the beginning of its lifetime. They don't remember the problems with the C-130J or the C-17 transport airplanes that we as Canadians depend on for hazard or humanitarian relief and that help the RCF every day. We don't have history of all the problems in virtually every aircraft development program in history. All Canadians know is the F-35. And so they keep coming back to it because, it's front and center so often.
Let's hope we're not still talking about whether we should buy the F-35 in another 15 years. Billy, thanks so much.
Brian, good to talk to you again.
All right, let us know what you think. Drop a comment down below, share this on social media, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.